We are on. Well, good morning all, or good afternoon for most of us on the East. I'm J.D. Hansen. I am a United Methodist who works for the Center for Food Safety on Farm Bill issues, but I'm also on the board of the United Methodist Caretakers of God's Creation, which is one of the sponsors of Ecumenical Advocacy Days. And we have three people here today to cover three different aspects of the Farm Bill. Those of you that have been paying attention to the lobbying ask of Ecumenical Advocacy Days know that the one of the two asks that we have of members of Congress is that they fully fund the SNAP program, nutrition program that works with the Women, Infant, and Children program to provide food to about 40 million people in the United States. So it is a significant part of the Farm Bill, and about 80% of the total expenses of the Farm Bill are in it, which is why there are members of Mr. McCarthy's party that want to cut as much of it as they can so they can use the money elsewhere. We've invited Patty Lavera, who is an expert in all of the Farm Bill, but we've particularly asked her to talk about what the coalitions working on organic farming are trying to get in the Farm Bill. Surbi Saran is going to be focusing on the way the Farm Bill can be used to make better climate policy. And Antonio Tovar, who are having difficulty getting onto the stage, and we're working on that, is the head of the National Family Farm Coalition. And he's going to be talking about what the Farm Bill needs to do for small farmers and farm workers. I've noticed that a few of you have started to put the chat of who you are into the chat. Please do that. I'd like to see where everybody's from, and we've got 41 of us in this workshop, which is pretty good. I'm going to quit talking because we've got three other speakers who will be talking longer than me, and my job is to do something that is always important to have someone do for me, which is to cut off people. And so, Patty, why don't you begin, and you can introduce yourself and tell us about it.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Patty Lavera, and normally I am based in DC, but I'm actually at a meeting in New York, hence my hotel room background here.
Likewise mine.
Yeah, it's the official Zoom background of the hotel room. So I've done a number of different policy jobs over the years in agriculture and food policy, including until about 6 months ago, doing policy work for a group called the Organic Farmers Association. So I am not currently with them, but I can kind of speak to like the priorities you hear from organic farmers in particular. And the Farm Bill is a vehicle to take that on. So probably if you self-selected to come to this session, you probably know, but the Farm Bill is a big package. There's a lot of moving parts. It's a lot of money. We do it approximately every 5 years. Sometimes there's slippage. And so it really, one way to think about it is that it's a way to direct just about everything that the U.S. Department of Agriculture does, and they do a lot of things. So organic is one of them. So organic is, people are more familiar with it. Lots of people are buying some organic food now, but I think a lot of people actually don't understand what is unique about organic. And one of the most unique things about organic is that the government actually plays a really big role in this particular food label in a way we don't see in other parts of the marketplace. So the USDA regulates that word, and there's a very large infrastructure behind the organic label of quite a few moving parts. So there's a set of standards. There's a process for updating those standards that's very open to the public, and there's a lot of public input into that process. And then if a farmer or a food processor or somebody in the marketplace wants to use that organic label, they have to go through an inspection process to be certified. The USDA isn't the certifier, but they supervise the certifier. So there's a lot of infrastructure behind this label that we actually don't have other places in the marketplace. And so some things are going quite well in that infrastructure, and some things could be improved. And the Farm Bill is one opening in the kind of timeline of how policy is made to do that. So just a couple of kind of big themes you'll hear from folks who are in the organic side of things is there's always a need to make it easier for folks who are farming with organic farming methods. There's a specific type of production. There's things you do as an organic farmer. There's things you aren't doing as an organic farmer. You're not using synthetic inputs like synthetic fertilizers, synthetic pesticides. You're not using genetically engineered seeds. You're not using sewage sludge on farmland. So there's a list of don'ts, and there's also a whole big list of practices that you do because you're not relying on those chemical inputs and things like that. So more folks are farming that way than take the step to certify necessarily, because another part of being a certified organic farmer is paperwork. It's proving that you use those methods so that when your annual inspection comes up, you can show I didn't use prohibited methods. I did, use crop rotation. I am tracking this, like that. You can prove you're doing what you're doing the other 364 days a year. So some folks don't take that leap. So one of the big topics for the farming sector of organic farm, the organic industry, is making it easier to take that step and get certified, so that if there's a premium out there in the supply chain for raising food in this way that is positive for the environment and positive for all these reasons, like let's get folks past that final hurdle, get them certified so they can capture some of that premium if they're doing the work. So there's some very specific programs about, can we fix a program that exists but is not working properly? I'll just leave it at that, to help reimburse organic farmers and businesses for the expense they take on to certify. So it's a cost share program. It exists now. It exists because of the Farm Bill. We've got some operational problems in how it's running. So there's ideas in the Farm Bill to make that process better. There's actually a bill called the Organic Opportunities Act that would improve that program and create some other pathways to make it easier for folks to take that final step and certify. A lot of folks kind of don't take the leap to be organic because it's, I've always used this particular tool. I used this herbicide. I did this thing. I know that's not allowed in organic. I'm not sure I'm ready to take that risk. There's technical assistance and training and education that could help. What is the network of groups we can get out in the field so that it's peer-to-peer, right? Can we have existing organic farmers be mentors to folks who are looking at organic? So this Organic Opportunities Act is kind of a nice package of things to help folks take that leap and get into a growing market. Like if you listen to any speeches from the current Secretary of Agriculture, one of his lines in his stump speech is, we're looking for newer and better markets for farmers, and organic should be one of them. And we want to make sure people can actually get in there and that they see it as a path to economic viability. And if the obstacle is something like getting the certification, getting a little bit of training, let's remove that obstacle. So the Farm Bill could do that through something like the Organic Opportunities Act. There's some very particular things people are kicking around about making USDA's infrastructure for organic, and we got to update standards. The world changes. Let's keep the standards as strong as they can be so it's a trusted label and consumers are willing to pay for it. That takes work. At USDA, it takes updating policies periodically and getting them across the finish line through the bureaucracy. So there's going to be some bills and some efforts to look at that. And then another one that I think is really worth flagging for this kind of group is USDA doesn't invest enough in agricultural research, period. Like over the decades, we have dropped how much the federal government invests in research into agriculture. So that is always a hot topic. As that government investment has dropped, guess what investment has replaced it? It's largely been from corporations who aren't doing pure research. They are doing research to say, oh, you have a weed problem, you solve it with our chemical. Here's the research that shows you how. So we actually need more government support of agricultural research across the board, but particularly in methods that would work for organic farmers. Like the government is going to have to pay for the research to show people how to solve weed pressure problems without using chemical inputs. No company is going to pay for that because there's nothing to sell. So there will be efforts to really bump up the amount of USDA investment into organic techniques. It doesn't mean you have to certify organic at the end of the process. We all benefit if more farmers find an alternative way to deal with their production problems that doesn't involve a chemical input or, a synthetic, gets people off of nitrogen fertilizer. All of the techniques, you don't have to go across the finish line to be certified organic, to incorporate some of the techniques so that research actually benefits everybody, even beyond organic. And then the last thing I'll flag is a very specific item that we're hearing a lot from organic farmers in the organic community is, in particular, organic dairy farmers are really looking for safety net programs. So if you're a veteran of previous Farm Bill discussions, there's a title for commodities and there's lots of moving parts in there for corn or soy or whatever it is. And dairy is a big piece of that. Sorry, someone, of course, is calling me at this moment. The organic folks or especially organic dairy folks don't get the same kind of safety net that their conventional neighbors get. And for years, that wasn't a critical issue because it was kind of this booming market. There was more demand than there was supply, and people were doing okay. That is no longer the case for many reasons, but corporate consolidation of the organic milk market is actually one of them. And that is a whole nother topic. The Farm Bill should do more on the topic of like who is controlling supply chains. Do we have enough buyers for farmers? But for a long time, I think organic folks thought they had outrun that problem because they were an alternative supply chain. And that problem is, as organic has gotten more popular, corporate food companies have noticed there's been a lot of buying, and those supply chains are starting to look more like conventional supply chains, and farmers aren't necessarily getting the prices they need, especially for organic milk. So the short version of the need is, the first step would be for the USDA to do the same tracking of organic milk that they do for conventional milk, which is the first step towards designing a financial safety net, because dairy is very prone to volatility. We have booms and busts, and in conventional dairy, there's a very elaborate system that's supposed to provide some financial safety net to help farmers through that hard time. And organic folks have none of that, and they don't even have the data to understand their market and see how they would build such a thing, or to know how to make informed decisions about, should I grow, should I shrink, is there an excess, is there a shortage? No one's tracking it in the way that conventional milk is tracked. So that's a very specific problem that the Farm Bill could solve for that particular sector of folks. So there are other things, but I think those are a couple that are worth flagging, that you can kind of wrap your heads around, maybe, about like, these are really concrete problems that a Farm Bill could solve by giving USDA instructions and funding about how to make this sector work. It has been a place where mid-sized and smaller farms could find some economic viability they may not have found otherwise. It has kept some small and mid-sized farms farming over the last couple of decades. So we want it to grow, but we want it to grow in a way that it still continues to work for that size farm. It still continues to be a label with integrity for consumers. We don't want it to be the standards to slip and become something people become skeptical of in terms of greenwashing. And that takes investment and oversight. And that's the kind of thing we can do in a Farm Bill. The last thing I'll say is that there's plenty of other moving parts of the Farm Bill, and you're going to hear about them from the other speakers. And organic folks will benefit from that as well. A lot of organic producers sell into kind of regional and local markets. There's a lot of organic folks that sell direct, and there's a whole suite of programs in the Farm Bill that get referred to as LAMP, local agricultural marketing programs. Is it, do we give vouchers to seniors to use at their farmers market? A lot of organic farmers benefit from those programs. It doesn't have to have the word organic in it to benefit folks in the organic sector. So the local marketing programs, research in general. Crop insurance needs to work better for organic farmers. There's a lot of improvements across the board where we don't want organic to be forgotten, even if it's not an organic specific program. So yeah, I'll stop there, and they'll probably, hopefully that raises questions and we can discuss them at the end. Thanks.
Yeah, you've got one already, and we're working on getting Antonio in. Um, the Antonio, you can hear us. Would you put which email you're using in the chat so we can make sure we get you pulled in?
And JD, if you allow me just to interrupt real quickly, I think
Sure.
What he just needs to do is to go out and come back in from the side navigation, scroll down to where it says my speaking opportunities, basically, and he can join from there, and it'll get him backstage.
Okay, that's great. Okay, why don't you try that, Antonio? And now we will move on to our next speaker. But in the while I'm introducing her, or asking her to introduce herself, I would urge you to put any questions you have for any of the speakers into the Q&A so we can get to them at the end. Surbi, welcome. It's nice to see you. And would you introduce yourself and talk as you will?
Great, thank you. And can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, we can.
So I'm Surbi Sarang. I'm an attorney with the Food Project of Public Justice, where I work on reforming the industrial animal agriculture system. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how the Farm Bill can be used to advance climate policy, as JD mentioned. So as Patty set up, like, Farm Bill is huge. There's a lot of money on the table, a lot of opportunity potentially to incentivize the kinds of practices in agriculture that we want to see more of. And this is really important because, as we know, agriculture is both a contributor to climate change, but also a potential solution to climate change. You know, on the contributor side, it's a huge source of greenhouse gas emissions, particularly nitrous oxide, which is released through over application of nitrogen fertilizer, which, when it's not taken up by crops and plants, it gets released into the atmosphere, where it contributes to warming. And another major source of emissions is methane emissions from livestock operations, both enteric fermentation and emissions released from manure. But there's also a huge potential in our agricultural system to sequester carbon in soil, because crops have the ability to suck carbon out of the air and put it into the soil. And we know that there are a set of agroecological practices that really further a whole host of goals. Not only do they build healthier soil that can hold more carbon in the soil and thus, you know, help us combat climate change, but also they make building healthier soil make the cropland more resilient to the impacts of climate change, such as drought and other extreme temperature and other impacts. And also, a lot of these practices have been shown to increase yields for farmers. And so these are practices like cover crops, crop rotation, nutrient management, incorporating trees, vegetation, perennials into cropland. And these are practices, a lot of these practices, you know, have been used by indigenous communities for ages. So we know that they work and that they are very effective, and we just need to get farmers the incentives and support to adopt these practices. And so under the Farm Bill, Congress authorizes a host of conservation programs, and these are programs through which, you know, taxpayer money is used to subsidize farmers in incorporating and implementing conservation practices. So, you know, there's both like the things that we want to incentivize through these conservation programs, and then I'll also talk a little bit about some policies that we are trying to steer clear of in this Farm Bill. So in general, we want these conservation programs to proactively support adoption of practices that have climate benefits, and we want to basically help farmers use their operations to hold more carbon in the soil. And Congress took a first step towards doing this in the IRA, which did amend some of these programs to explicitly allocate money for adoption of climate-friendly practices. And so we want to basically build on that, expand that, and keep that in the Farm Bill, and increase funding for these programs. A lot of them are underfunded. There's more farmers who are interested in utilizing these programs than there is funding currently. So we really want to expand that. And as we expand that and allocate this funding, we also want to make sure that we are allocating the funding to the farmers who are on the smaller to mid-size operations and who are operating more sustainably. And so we don't want to see a lot of funding going to large industrial polluting operations. And right now that's not the case. Right now there is a lot of money in these conservation programs that goes to particularly large-scale industrial livestock operations, factory farms, also known as concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs, where you have tens of thousands of animals enclosed in a space and producing just unsustainable amounts of manure, that there really is just no way to sustainably manage the amount of manure produced by these huge industrial scale livestock operations. And so, we would really like to see none of this money going to those operations that are, some of the most polluting, that have huge environmental justice concerns, because they're often emitting, not only methane emissions and greenhouse gas emissions, but also other toxic chemicals that have health impacts on local communities, also impacting water supplies and contaminating water. And so we really want to see money not going to those operations, and instead going to smaller, mid-sized operations that are operating on more sustainable scales. And in particular, also another thing that we really want to see money not go to is methane biodigesters, which have been, kind of touted as a solution to the problem of methane emissions from livestock operations. And these are basically they're basically mechanisms to capture emissions from manure that's produced by the livestock. And once you capture that methane, it basically allows the CAFO or factory farm to sell that gas back onto the grid. And while they even if they have this kind of benefit of capturing the methane, we really don't see them as a solution, because they're basically incentivizing the production of greater amounts of manure so that you can continue to produce this methane, because suddenly you have a profit from it. You're able to capture it, sell it back to the grid. And so really you're just incentivizing the production of more and more manure. You're really only benefiting these large, super polluting facilities that are able to capture enough methane to make it worthwhile to capture to the grid. Methane biodigesters don't deal with a lot of the other environmental justice concerns, right? They don't address the kind of water pollution issues and other toxic air emissions that are produced from these facilities. And so we don't see them as a solution. And right now, USDA is giving money to them through conservation programs. And so we would really like to see that money reallocated to actually sustainable operations and to actual solutions. Another big thing that we really want to see USDA do is incorporate racial justice into its programs. USDA has a history of not allocating money and not making money in programs accessible to BIPOC farmers. And so in all of these programs, we definitely want to see, make sure that there are mechanisms to make sure that this funding and these programs are available to all farmers, including farmers who have been historically excluded from such programs. And then I guess the last thing I'll talk about is also another policy that we are really pushing back against, which is the use of taxpayer money to subsidize private carbon markets, which is another kind of hot topic right now. And these are basically private markets where, a large company that, for example, wants to say that they're carbon neutral can offset its own emissions by purchasing credits from the market, is going to farmers who are actually, implementing certain practices that are sequestering carbon. But we see a lot of problems with these right now. Being able to measure carbon soil is really uncertain. And so there's problems with just measurement and like, how do you make sure that the corporation that's getting the credit for sequestering a certain amount of carbon is actually having that impact? It's just hard to measure. It's hard to verify. It's also there's a permanence problem, because when you do sequester carbon in soil, it's not necessarily permanent. It could be undone pretty quickly. And in addition, it kind of allows for corporations to not actually make reductions within their own supply chains and within their own operations, and yet claim that they are having a positive climate impact. And so there are huge greenwashing concerns. And there are lots of concerns with the fact that carbon markets are not accessible to smaller scale farmers, that the operations that can really take advantage of these markets and profit from them are larger industrial scale operations. And so it just, in a lot of ways, these markets are further entrenching highly polluting operations and allowing corporations to not make reductions within their own supply chains as they should be. So yeah, I guess I'll stop there.
Okay, well, thank you. And some people have been putting questions into the chat, which after Antonio, we'll take those questions. We need to thank both Charmaine and Silas for getting Antonio this stage, they're calling it, and I don't want to take any more of his. Antonio is the executive director of the National Family Farm Coalition, one of the groups that belong to.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. Just let me clarify. I'm not the executive director of NFFC. I'm the senior policy associate of the NFFC. I was the executive director of the Farm Work Association of Florida, and I'm going to be talking about precisely farm workers and small farmers. Sometimes we do the division of these two groups, but there are many similarities in terms of how much they have been affected by industrial agriculture, and consolidation is one of the main reasons that we are in these issues of very contaminated, very unsustainable way of farming. And it has an effect precisely on farm workers and also in small farmers, that they have been pretty much being pushed out of their land and their ways of production. So for farm workers, having a sustainable agriculture means also having a livable wage, and also not being exposed to pesticides as much as they are right now. Industrial agriculture is unsustainable. It's not a way that we can keep doing these farming operations. And it has been a process. The Farm Bill, the policies of the Farm Bill during many, many years have been favor consolidation and efficiency. And the argument is that we can get into security, national security. And I think that these are two concepts that are not the most effective way in terms of having a food access, secure food access, healthy food access, neither looking for sustainable of agriculture. And one of the reasons is because the expansion of U.S. agriculture is based on this monocropping and conventional agriculture that has produced mainly the loss of our access to healthy food and the growth of unhealthy food. One of the ways, or one of the strategies that the Farm Bill do to move forward was the inclusion of nutritional aspect, SNAP. And SNAP, it's 80% of the budget on the farm bill. So that's why. But SNAP is a program that right now is being trying to put additional burden into having more limitation for people to access. Farm workers are one of the populations that receive SNAP, and sometimes not because they qualify for SNAP, but it's their children who qualify for SNAP. Now, unfortunately, there's also small farmers that have to get SNAP to survive. Right now, more than 60% of small farmers have an outside job of their farm because they are losing money farming. They are not sustainable in terms of having fair prices. That's why I say that there's not a strong divide in terms of the challenges that farm workers and small farmers face, especially with consolidation and the industry facing right now. Now, I want to address something that Patty touched, because I think that's important. When we're talking about the safety net on dairy, the NFFC, part of the National Family Farm Coalition, is very important dairy, because right now we are losing 2 dairy farmers a day, and most of them are conventional. But what is happening in the organic dairy world is pretty much what it happens on the conventional dairy, that the consolidation is pretty much kicking out the people out of their farms. So the safety net that has been good for many dairy farmers, it's actually been benefiting mainly the larger producers and not necessarily the small producers. So for NFFC, one of the main points to change the overall system of dairy production. In the past, we used to have a supply management system in many operations. Sugar still have supply management system, and that's one of the ways to secure price floors for the farmers, based also in terms of the cost of production, but also limit the overproduction of milk. I think that one of the issues, and it was mentioned, there's many issues, but one of the issues with dairy, there's a lot of competition from other beverage. The other also called dairy products, like coconut milk, oatmeal, etc., etc. And there's also a bill trying to limit the use of milk on these products. People is consuming less dairy or less milk. We have overproduction of dairy, and a supply management system will control the overproduction of dairy, or potentially that would be one of the goals, to try to limit the overproduction of dairy. And well, I know there's many other topics, but we are short on time, and there's probably many questions that will be good to address. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonio. We've had a few questions in the chat that, or in the Q&A, that Patty Lovera has put answers in for. There's one that maybe the other 3 of you know more about this than I do. One of the questions is, I heard something about a food pantry industrial complex. Not sure the exact wording. Anybody know anything about this? Well, there's certainly a food industrial complex where different parts of the food system are pretty well controlled by rich companies. But I don't know anything that's called a food pantry industrial complex. Anybody else?
I haven't heard that term, but there are folks who are on kind of the service provider side of hunger. who I have heard critiques over the years of kind of hesitance to speak out against, there's the food industry is a huge employer. Are they paying wages that their workers can have a dignified life? Like, what about when Walmart employees need to sign up for food assistance, even though they work at a food store? So, and that because a lot of the donors of food and money to large networks of food banks and things like that, that there's a hesitance to speak out because those are the folks bringing food that gets given away. So there is a critique, I think, sometimes inside, kind of the service provider community about like feeling restricted to make a systemic analysis of poverty when you're dependent on big companies to be the providers of what you give away.
Well, one of the things I put in the chat, but as it orally as well, the big ask that we're asking the religious community to make is to really undergird the food assistance parts of this program. And then you're all religious people. Your church may be like mine and have its own food pantry that gives out food, and it gives money. I live in Arlington. We give money to the Arlington Food Assistance Council, which provides food in Arlington, Virginia, one of the 3 richest counties by per capita in the country. We give food to 3,000 families, which is amazing for a community as small as Arlington. But when you talk to your members of Congress, if you know about dairy, talk about the dairy. If you know about farm worker problems, talk about that. If you have a concern and know about climate and what they want to do, talk about that. But when a member of Congress staff or a member of Congress asks you something you don't know the answer to, tell them you'll get back to them. And the 4 of us will be happy to find answers for you. But mostly tell them about what you know about, which ought to be feeding the poor people in your community and working with the people that work in hotels and the people that work in farms. So, I mean, but if any group in the country knows how many people are so needy, I work with a young man, through our church that was homeless. He's not homeless now because we've managed to get him housing. He's got a job, but he still makes so little he qualifies for SNAP. And if all of these folks that don't like SNAP would just make sure everybody had enough pay, then we wouldn't need this.
Yeah, JD, just to add that if Lobby Day is tomorrow and meetings are tomorrow, it's incredibly well timed because this is a farm bill issue. If you looked at the money from the farm bill, that pie, the biggest percentage of that pie is SNAP, and it is always since the last decade this has been the biggest fight. Is like what is the role of the government in providing this basic assistance. It is particularly heated right now, and it's also rolling out of the farm bill into the debt ceiling conversation. So there's a big attempt right now this week to make it harder for people they won't say they're cutting SNAP. They're just going to make it impossible to qualify for SNAP by throwing up very arcane, very hard to meet work requirements when most SNAP recipients work. It's that their jobs don't pay them enough to live, and they're just throwing up more restrictions, more exclusions to make it harder for people to be eligible for SNAP. It's a cut it's unacceptable, right? It's moving the wrong way. So it's a farm bill issue, but it is also just a current issue as Congress tries to figure out what they're going to do about this debt ceiling debate. This is one of the big money savers the Republicans have in that bill in the House about the price they want to extract to raise the debt ceiling is they want cuts to these kinds of safety net programs.
Well, Serby and Tumino, do you have any comments?
I will. I think I will add what you and Patty was saying, because the reality is that the United States is a very wealthy nation, and it's not fair that we rely a lot on SNAP to make people survive. So the reality is that a good salary, and we are pretty much subsidizing corporations with SNAP because they are not paying their employees a fair salary. And on the other hand, we are drawing from programs that can help farmers to have a better production and more healthy food production with these kind of programs, because most of these resources will go to corporations.
Serby, you got the last word.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just the other critique of food pantries is that they're a Band-Aid solution, and we really need systemic change. And if you think about the concept of food sovereignty, like people should really, we should be promoting systemic policies that allow people choice and just sovereignty over their food system to be able to have control over what they're eating and not be dependent on charity and on these other programs. And that in some cases, I think, yeah, there's just critique of like the anti-hunger movement and the way in which it's focused on Band-Aid solutions instead of advocating for example, like increasing the minimum wage and reducing housing costs and all these other policies that are very separate from but very related to people being able to access food.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to be shut down in a minute, but thank you all for coming. And again, if you want more information, just send it to the EAD folks, and they'll make sure that the four of us get answers to your questions if we can answer them. And let us know how your lobbying visits go. Thank you all.